Good evening, everyone. This is Thomas Punton, LionLord from the Great North Pagan Podcast, coming from you in Castleton, North Dakota. It is August 24th, 2012, and I know it's been a while since you last heard from us when you were getting ready to try to outdo your last Pagan Pride Day. For the second annual Pagan Pride Day, you're kind of like running around with the chicken with its head cut off, and whew, we did overcome that. But now that things have settled down here, we're ready to new here as we're 1 year old. And to way to start this out here, I have a guest here. Coming all the way from Wisconsin is Shauna. Merry meet.
Merry meet. Thanks for having me on the show.
Oh, no problem. How are you doing?
Doing well.
That's great. Well, why don't you tell the mystical audience out there a little about yourself?
Well, I was born in Wisconsin, and actually that's where I am right at the moment, although most of the time I live in Chicago. Mm-hmm. And, I was raised by, people ask me, were you raised Christian? Were you raised other religion? And I tell people I was raised hippie.
That's kind of interesting because a couple of weeks ago I actually saw a hippie van.
Yeah, my folks were into all sorts of energy healing, past life regression, chakra healing, all sorts of mystical woo-woo stuff. And so, I wasn't raised really with any one specific religion. I was just raised with a lot of mystic stuff. And what my parents pretty much, they didn't always say this up front, but they kind of gave me the impression of, like, if you want to find religion, go find it. It's on you.
Did they just use their own common knowledge, or did they have any sources they were going from?
Yeah, well, my dad's best friend when I was growing up, my dad's best friend actually did hypnotherapy and past life regression, and my dad actually, it's interesting. We're doing a podcast here. I'm on a laptop here in Wisconsin. You're in a laptop in a different state. And my dad used to do radio, like college radio, and he would do these radio shows talking about ancient Egypt and Atlantis. Wow. Oh yeah, that back when he was in college. So, I mean, it's interesting how this stuff kind of comes full circle.
The circle life continues, yeah.
Right,
very much.
Exactly. But I mean, as far as his sources, my father passed about 1.5 years ago, and my brother and I have been going through his library of books, and he had hundreds of books on Reiki, energy healing, Egypt, different theories on the pyramids, other sacred sites, Atlantis, Edgar Cayce, all sorts of stuff. I mean, he was definitely into all that stuff. My mom was a little bit more into, like, the energy healing, Shirley MacLaine. So they had friends who did chakra healing, and they'd teach me how to do stuff. They had a friend who did dream work, and so I started writing down my dreams when I was about 11 or 12.
Wow.
And so, I mean, I haven't always been pagan, but I have always been exposed to all this kind of woo stuff.
Because I was going to ask you then, how long you studied it. So, yeah. I mean, I guess, talently speaking, the paganism that the audience probably has known about, how long do you think you've really been into that?
Well, I would say I self-declared as a pagan when I was about 15.
Okay.
So that's, 20 years ago. But a lot of, because there's paganism as a spiritual path or as a religion, whichever one you want to call it.
Yeah.
And then there's kind of all the different skills and tools that kind of get associated with paganism, or that you might learn as a pagan. Like, you might learn how to do Reiki healing or chakra healing. You might learn how to do different kinds of energy work. You might learn how to do past life regressions. There's a lot of, I would say, esoteric, if I can use the word, technologies.
Yeah.
Working with psychic phenomena, learning, to strengthen telepathy, empathy, the precognition, clairvoyance.
You do also like also shielding, protection, that sort of thing?
I used to do a lot more of that when I was younger, and as my spiritual path has developed, certain things have kind of changed for me as far as what I guess, where my energetic focus is, if that makes any sense. But I guess for me, it's more of a philosophical. I'm trying to think of how to put this. Sometimes it's so hard to put these concepts into words.
I know.
Yeah. It's when I used to do a lot of work with energetic shielding, and but part of that was when I was around what I would consider to be a hostile environment. Like many people, not just pagans, but like many people out there, growing up, I was not the popular kid in school. In fact, I was very much the unpopular kid in school. And so a lot of the energetic shielding work that I did was when I, going to school or, early going to college even, and maybe to a certain extent when I would go to work in my early 20s, I put a lot of focus on shielding. But as I kind of got, I guess as I got more, as I grew better communication skills and as I grew better boundaries, what I kind of learned is that I can choose to not be in environments where I'm feeling like I'm in a hostile environment. Like I can cut toxic people out of my life.
Yeah.
And so for me, a lot of the stuff that I do when I teach like pagan leadership, what I actually am doing is like, yes, shielding is great when you're in what I would call a specifically hostile environment. But at the same time, I focus more on the positive energy. I focus more on putting myself in situations where I am in a positive environment. I'm around people that I want to be around. I'm trying to bring that life, love, connection energy more than protecting from negative energy. So for me, it's just a slight philosophical shift, and it's instead of being, I look at a lot of the ways shielding is taught. It kind of focuses on the idea that everybody's out to get you.
Yeah.
And that's not the perspective that I come from. So that's what I mean by I made kind of a philosophical shift where instead of trying to protect myself from everybody's bad energy around me, I just focus on being a good person and trying to be around people that I want to be around, and knowing that, sometimes I'm going to be around people that I don't want to be around, but trying to focus more on like that my own personal energy is going to keep me centered, and if I focus on that versus the more defensive
that's an interesting way to look at it, because from what pagans that I've talked with is that sometimes if there is some sort of negativity, you try to shield yourself from it, or just get away with it from it as best you can.
Yeah. There's an exercise, if you're ever looking for a specific exercise or meditation, really you can use any visualization that works for you. But I was taking a shamanism class in Chicago, and the specific exercise that the instructor used was, she had us imagine kind of around our heart chakra and solar plexus, imagining like there's a sun inside of our chest, and it's expanding out to kind of fill the whole sphere of that would contain our bodies.
Oh, so that basically you're radiating out warmth and positive energy.
Right, and for me, the focus on shielding is it assumes negative intent from people, whereas I don't want to do that. One of the philosophical concepts that I generally subscribe to is something I learned at Diana's Grove, and it's called thinking well of others. It makes the assumption that most people did not get up today intending to kind of screw me over. Like people are gonna make mistakes, and that's gonna have a negative impact, or even just people are looking out for number one, and they're not necessarily thinking, like, somebody cuts you off on the road and they're driving. They aren't thinking, hey, I'm gonna screw that person over there. They're just trying to get where they're trying to get. And so in general, I try and look at most people as they're not trying. Person X has a bad day and it impacts me. do I need to have some big metaphysical shield against that? No, I can just have some compassion that they're having a rough day, and hope that maybe they can learn to not push their bad day out onto other people. So again, for me, it's a philosophical approach of, instead of trying to defend against everybody's negative energy, it's just accepting that bad things happen, and it's not really about me most of the time, and just trying to keep my own energetic center together. And there's we all make enemies. Or frenemies is a word I just learned today. I've never heard that before. I was like, oh, I like that. But I mean, we're gonna tick other people off. People are gonna tick us off, and I think that the actual instances of people needing a really solid energetic shielding from the perspective of people are actually out to get me and sending negative energy to me, I think that's really actually pretty rare. I think that's actually pretty rare.
That's an interesting approach to the whole situation. What would you teach someone if they feel like someone is like trying to put a curse on them, or trying to send negative energies then?
Well, so I do teach some psychic development classes, and I also because I know a lot of people friend me on Facebook, and so people will ask me questions like that. Mm-hmm. And usually I take them through like kind of a physical reality check. Okay. Well, so one of the tools that I teach when I'm teaching pagan leadership is it's called the 4 levels of reality, and it's what I try and do is I try and get them to what actually happened. Like, why do you think that this person is gunning for you? Okay. Because most of the time I find that people really, we don't really have arch enemies for the most part. I mean, we humans tend to over dramatize things in our minds. Yeah. And I get why we do it, because, life's more exciting when you have an arch nemesis.
Well, I guess I don't know if you necessarily would blame pop culture for that sort of thing. The old good versus evil.
Right, exactly. I mean, I was actually talking to somebody about the concept of dualism. Is that good versus evil? The idea that there's this, good force and evil force. I'm not a dualist. I just believe that the universe is, and stars get destroyed and stars get born, and there's no evil force. It's just that, hey, a star blew up. Oops. It happens. So, I mean, I guess for most people's actions, again, when I'm looking at it as thinking well of others, most of the time people are not trying to screw me over. And so what I'll do is I'll talk to somebody and talk them through, like, okay, they'll tell me their story of why so-and-so, they think so-and-so is cursing them or sending bad energy their way. And I say, okay, well, what's the conflict that happened? And so it might come down to something as silly as, well, when I was at this ritual with them, they glared at me from across the circle, and and so it's, well, all right, are you sure they were glaring at you? Like, oh yeah, it was definitely glaring. I was like, well, did you ask them?
But yeah, was it maybe, because it could be very, very possible there might be something that was coming onto their mind that just turned their eyes that way.
Right, and so the basic concept of 4 levels of reality is that physical reality is what actually happened. Person A was standing in the circle. Person B looked across the circle in the direction where person A was, and a weird look crossed their face. So it's like without telling the story about what happened, you're just telling the physical thing of what happened. Mm-hmm. And then you go into the mythic reality, which is the story we instantly create. So-and-so slammed the door, so-and-so glared at me. Because that's how our mind works. That's just how our minds work.
And I think that especially this day and age, with ways, society is like so tense. Yeah. With the way we anticipate what the media thinks, what we think, what our friends are doing and all that.
Oh, yeah.
That's an interesting way to step back and realize that might not be what's happening.
It's actually this tool in most groups, if you actually use this as a conflict resolution tool, like anytime you're ticked off at somebody or there's a conflict, if you actually go through this tool and like, what's the physical thing that happened? What's the story I'm making up about it? And then the next phase of the reality, the 3rd level, is the emotional reality, which is how do I feel about that story? Because like if I think so-and-so was glaring at me across the circle, I'm going to feel kind of upset. I might feel embarrassed. I might feel angry. I might feel hurt, however I'm feeling about it. And then at the bottom of it, the fourth level of reality is essential reality, which is, why did I choose that story? Why did so-and-so is making a funny look at me across the circle. Why did I jump to they're glaring at me instead of jumping to, oh gosh, did they get stung by a bee?
Yeah.
Because there's any number of stories.
Or they can make you thinking like, oh man, I had a rough day at the office, or that sort of thing. Yeah.
Right. And so essential reality is where kind of the pagan leadership stuff that I teach, and as well as metaphysics, kind of crosses over into psychology, because essential reality is like, I kind of, when I'm teaching leadership stuff, I joke like this is the stuff that you might want to go and deal with in some therapy. Because the essential reality stuff very often just boils down to your own self-image. And it's how you think the world works. And if you really believe that people are out to get you, that most people are going to try and screw you over, you're going to be running around feeling like you need to shield against the world, and you're going to be feeling like people are glaring at you or they're laughing at you. Like, think about it. Just, homework for all you people listening. As you walk around, think about the stories you're making up, and then think about where do the stories come from. Like, me being somebody who was made fun of a lot in grade school and middle school, and high school, and a little bit in college. It got better.
Yeah, it did for me too, so I understand.
But I was somebody who, when I walked down the hall in middle school, like, people would laugh at me. And so nowadays, like, if I'm walking by some people that I know or something, and I hear people all of a sudden break out into laughter, one of the first things that will occur to me is, oh, are they laughing at me?
Because you've been so used to that, your first instinct is to think that.
Right, but because I've done so much personal growth work and therapy and other things, I know that that's my first instinct. My first instinct is, oh, are they laughing at me? And then I could go, okay, let me do a reality check here. Am I that important that people are running around laughing at me? No, not really. So, so it's kind of going back through what, doing a little bit of a reality check and looking at, okay, do they have a reason to laugh at me? Did I do something dumb? Because I do. Like, oh yeah, I totally screwed up when I was doing blah blah blah, whatever. Okay, then they can laugh at me, and it's not like they're laughing at me because they hate me. It's just I did something kind of silly. But maybe they're not laughing at me. Maybe their conversation has absolutely nothing to do with me. So there's a lot of tools that I can use. Like, I look at what is that first instinct that I have and realize, okay, I have that instinct because I went through this as a kid. But then also, like, in the case of somebody's glaring at me across the circle, well, gosh, if I'm circling with this person all the time, or they're a member of my community and I think they're glaring at me, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go over to them after the circle and say, hey, during the circle, I noticed you had kind of a funny look across your face when you were looking at me, and I don't know if you we were all barefoot and maybe you stepped on something that hurt, or but were you making a funny look at me? And maybe they say, oh yeah, I totally got a mosquito bite.
Oh, there you go.
There you go. And they might say, oh, well, I thought you were glaring at me, right? Or they might say, gosh, I was thinking about that conversation we had last week about blah, 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 and I was actually kind of angry about that.
Oh.
So then you can actually have a conversation with them and figure out what's going on, and maybe you guys have some philosophical differences.
And try to resolve it, yeah. And
you can try to resolve it, and maybe you might have to agree to disagree. You might say, well, like, you feel this way about the transgender stuff, and I feel this way, and but here's the things that we do agree on as far as community connection, blah blah blah. So whatever it is, if you can actually resolve that conflict, I literally have seen community conflicts fester from something that boiled down to, oh, well, when I came into the room, he left the room because he was mad at me. Well, do you know he was mad at you? Oh yeah. how do you know he was mad at you? Well, because of that look he gave me. When was this? 3 years ago. You know, I mean, literally, I know pagans in communities who have not. I mean, we're talking leaders in communities who have not spoken because of these assumptions, and yeah,
too.
Yeah, and so many of these conflicts, if you actually are willing to hitch up your britches and go have a conversation with somebody, and say, hey, is this what's going on? And it's rough in the sense of, we Americans do not like conflict. In fact, most people don't like conflict. There's some cultures that have some really specific ways of addressing conflicts in an even way, but I know, well, I can speak as a Midwestern American. I know that we're not supposed to. We're kind of conflict avoidant, and let's face it, it's a real psychological risk to go up to somebody and say, "Hey, are you mad at me?" Because
it really shows the times have changed.
Yeah. I mean, because they might be mad. I mean,
yeah.
A lot of the stuff that when I teach communication classes, and when I've taken communication classes, one of the things that has come up a few times is that we learn a lot of our communication skills from watching TV, and a lot of us in our formative years grew up watching sitcoms.
Mm-hmm.
Well, a situational comedy, the entire comedy is based around miscommunication.
Yeah.
And the example I give is I don't know, a show like Three's Company, for instance. That's one of the, the archetypal.
Oh yeah.
The archetypal, sitcoms where, Jack breaks Chrissy's hairdryer, but instead of just going to her and saying, "Hey, I broke your hairdryer and I don't have the money to buy you a new one this week, but I can buy you a new one next time I get paid," instead of just fessing up, sucking it up, and risking the other person getting mad and just taking it, instead an entire half-hour episode around the convoluted scheme to keep Chrissy from realizing that her hairdryer is broken. And this is what we learn. This is what we learn we're supposed to do. And the thing is, we're conflict avoidant because I think, and this is where I put my psychoanalysis hat on. I mean, I'm not a psychologist, but I'm very interested in psychology and how it connects to community building work. What we don't learn as children growing up, I think what we really don't learn is having a good, strong, healthy sense of self-esteem.
Yes.
And instead, what happens is we get so petrified at the idea that somebody's going to be angry at us that we are not willing to go and have the hard conversation with somebody.
One good example I can think of, even one step further in that, was an episode of Home Improvement when Tim and the boys had bought this remote-controlled race car that was autographed and everything. They brought it at a collector's store. And when Tim and Jill were out, the boys decided to take the car out of the box and start playing around with it, and they accidentally drove it on the street and got half ran over.
Right.
And so instead of telling Tim and Jill about what happened, they try to piece it back together very badly with chewing gum and all that and put it back in display like as if nothing happened. And then when Tim goes and shows Jill it and they see what had happened, at first Jill jumps to conclusions that they got duped, they got scammed out of the whole thing, and then Tim realizes that wasn't really what it was. So instead of confronting the boys of what happened, what do? No, they make it look like as if they've given up on a deal, because then they pretend they were on the phone with someone that wanted to buy the car, and the boys are like, no, don't buy it. And right. So they pretend the whole thing, and then they walk away, and the episode ends hearing the boys just blaming each other. It's all your fault for destroying the car and all that. It's like...
Well, exactly. I mean, and when we talk about sense of self, I mean, what we're essentially talking about is ego, and ego often gets used as a negative word, but actually it's not. Ego is our psychic skin. Ego is our self-identity. It's who we are. Now, egotism is different. Egotism is when we get, when we're arrogant, when we're, that's more of the negative connotation of it. But ego is just our identity, and the problem is shadow, a lot of deeper pagan spiritual work in many traditions is around shadow work, and shadow work is essentially those things that we are told in society are bad. We kind of try and divorce ourselves from those things. And so the idea that, if you don't like me, that means I'm bad, and that means I'm going to get kicked out of the cave, and that means I'm going to die. It's kind of the basic, reptile brain progression we go through. It's not quite that direct, but that's roughly what we go through. And so we avoid these conflicts, and then that's, exactly what happens in our communities is a lot of these smaller conflicts just become these longer festering wounds that really could be healed up if we were willing to actually go have that hard conversation, but have it from a place of compassion and love. And and I'm not going to say that all of us are always going to get along. There's people where there's leaders in the pagan community that I respect their work. We don't mesh well together at all personality wise, but I respect their work. So, there's a lot of stuff like that where, as far as paganism goes, it's not just the esoteric stuff as we were talking earlier about like chakra healing and Reiki and psychic phenomena, energetic protection, things like that. It's not just stuff like that. It's also there is a lot of work that we need to learn around basic group dynamics and community building. There's a lot of stuff we need to learn about psychology and how people work, because I can tell you all the effort and energy I used to put into making energetic shields. Like I used to focus a lot of my time and attention on that. And coming at the world from a more positive perspective, I enjoy the world so much better. It's not to say that everybody out there means me well, because they don't. Anytime you are a pagan leader, you put a little target on your back and you say, hey, shoot arrows at me, go for it.
I think that's what especially some new leaders, especially even myself, have had to understand, that there always will be people out there that will criticize. They'll always find fault, and the best thing you do, and I've had to learn this myself, don't take it personally.
Yeah, and some of the times what I try and do when people criticize stuff that I do, because I do get sensitive about it. I'm not gonna lie and say, oh, I totally just take it all with a grain of salt, because I don't. Let's say somebody complains about a ritual that I've led. Mm-hmm. I let myself be hurt for a moment because I'm human and I get to feel that. And then I might get a little ticked off and think, well, they just don't know what a good ritual looks like. And then I go, okay, all right, now I've had those emotional, cranky 2-year-old reactions. Okay.
Just like basically going like those 7 stages, first stage denial.
Grief and denial, and then I think, okay, is there anything that they're saying that's true? Like, is there anything that maybe I could have done differently in that ritual? So I think about it, and sometimes the answer is, yeah, there is some stuff that didn't really work in that ritual, so I can make that better for next time. And sometimes I'm just gonna have to go with, my rituals are not gonna work for everybody, and it obviously didn't work for this person. I can't please everybody. It's nothing personal. Yeah, so it's a process. It's not to say that feedback doesn't sting, because it might sting. It might sting a great deal, but sometimes there's good stuff in there, and you can both let yourself be hurt by the feedback and then just kind of take a breath and be like, okay, all right, have that. We're done being a 2-year-old. All right, now, is there anything useful?
Yeah, this is very enlightening information. I bet our viewers will love to hear about, because it does give, if you really think about it, it does give a good spin on how you perceive the world around you.
Yeah. Well, and that's the thing is, like, people do magic for a lot of different reasons, and most of the magical work that I do, most of the ritual work that I do, is around self-transformation. And I've had people say, well, why don't we do any real practical magic? For, blah, blah, blah. I'm trying to think of something specific for spell work. And I say, well, you're welcome to do that kind of stuff on your own time, but the real magic is actually changing ourselves. Because think about it. Like, have you ever tried to quit a habit?
It's very hard, yeah.
It's very hard, right? Like, and so, I mean, think about your processes in your brain and the way you think about the world and what deep grooves, like that cart has been going back and forth on that road for however many years old you are. And if you want to actually change that, change how you look at the world, change how you respond to the world, that's an awful lot of work. And for me, that's work that is very much worth doing, because I want to live in a society with other pagans who are healthy and mature and who are working on their stuff.
It's also like with the fear that you have to face it on your own. If I guess from what I understand, really, a spell can work, but really it's yourself that has to really face that fear and conquer it.
Right. I mean, and there's, to a certain extent, like, doing ritual work or working with a small group, there's a lot of stuff that you can do with other people, because what you'll find is a lot of your own shadows are the shadows that other people have too. But ultimately, much like with death, you can really only do it alone. You can do it side by side with other people, kind of going along the way for a good part of it. But and having allies in that work really helps. Having people to both challenge you to become better and more than you are is really important work. But it also requires you to do the work.
Very much so. I mean, I've been thankful, for a lot of my friends, especially one that was co-hosting on here for one of our episodes, Joy. She's been kind of been my teacher that I've been coming under her wing as well. That's been challenging, myself to kind of push the limit, and I've been, finally starting to learn my little niches as well.
Absolutely. Well, one of my mentors, Cynthia Jones from Diana's Grove, one of the things that she often said is, as a group leader or any initiative, whatever you're doing, your group cannot be healthier than you are. Whatever your issues are and baggage is, you bring that to the group with you.
Yeah.
That to any project you're running. And so, I mean, if you don't work on your stuff, nobody can work on your stuff for you. So it is. I mean, it is good. It is good that we continue to do that.
So then, other than the teachings, what other projects have you worked on? I know you've worked with many pagan events in your area.
Yeah, that's I've done. How do I even put that? Well, I've been traveling and teaching as well as leading events in Chicago for a few years now. I went to the Diana's Grove Leadership Program. I started that in 2005 and graduated. It's not exactly a graduation. It's kind of complicated, but it's going through what's called a rites of passage intensive year, and that was the end of 2007. So I did 3 years there of intensive work, and in 2006, I was living in St. Louis at the time, and I started running a group with a number of other mystery school, Diana's Grove Mystery School participants, one of them being River Higginbotham, who's an author of a great book on paganism. Like, if you're looking for a really good book to recommend to new seekers, I really recommend his book Paganism, because it's a great place to start. But he and I led a group together. I mean, there are many people leading together, but he and I were definitely the I guess I'd call us the workaholics of the group. And so, we were trying to build something in St. Louis, and we ran some events there and did some classes and did monthly rituals for a while, and that was really a great time. That group kind of ran its course. There were a lot of people who had enjoyed doing the work, but they also were starting to kind of get burned out, and they were really ready to move on to something else. And so then that's when I moved back to Chicago, and I started being involved with different pagan groups in the area and started helping to run public rituals, and started traveling and teaching. And so, I mean, as far as different stuff that I've done, I've run a few I guess I would say local to a city, kind of conference festival kind of events where they're either like a day or 2 days where you've got a few different tracks of workshops and some rituals. I've traveled and taught. Oh gosh, I don't even think I can list all the communities where I've traveled and taught, but mostly around the Midwest. Just did one in Peoria, Illinois. That was a great group. We had a lot of fun. I've taught in St. Louis. I've taught in Kansas City. I've taught in Milwaukee. I've taught in a few places in Indiana.
What would you be your best advice for people that are starting out new events?
Well, so for people who are starting like a pagan event, like
for us, we just completed. Yeah, we just completed our second Pagan Pride Day.
That's awesome. What would I recommend? Well,
because it went wonderfully. We had a lot of new faces there. The ritual went wonderfully and all that, but it did feel like we were really, really trying to get the things together. Finally, the last final crucial moments.
Well, I've run a lot of events to the point where I can kind of plan an event in my sleep these days, but I will say that I still do a lot of running around right before the event.
Yeah. Not to say that won't happen, but just feel, we look back at it and we feel like, well, if we'd done this a little bit sooner in advance or this a little bit sooner in advance, maybe we'd have had this come out a little bit better, that sort of thing. So that's why I'm wondering to our viewers out there that might be starting their own event, might not necessarily be a Pagan Pride Day, but any sort of pagan event, what would be your best advice?
Well, so there's a couple of things that I would say. One is, and I'm just going to risk stepping on some people's toes. I see a lot of people starting up events and I'll step on my own toes here. I will admit that when I first started planning pagan events, I kind of had this whole I wanted to be the pagan. I don't know. I wanted people to be like, oh, she put on a really good event. It was there was a little bit of ego trip in there. Mm-hmm. And I see a lot of pagan organizers who kind of start from that place. And then I think the people who burn out the fastest are very often the people who realize wow, this is really an awful lot of work.
For those of you that have not done a pagan event, I will tell you it is not the easiest.
It's not easy. It's a lot of work, and I think I call it the event planning bug. Yeah. You've either got it or you don't. And I talk to all sorts of pagans who they don't have the event planning bug. They have no desire to plan a pagan event. But then I work with other people and we start talking about something like, oh, we could bring in this author. Oh, blah, blah, blah. We could have this track of programming over here. Blah, blah, blah. And so some people have the bug. Some people, you'll know if you have the bug or not. But what I'd say is really, again, do that ego check. Do that reality check. Are you starting this event because you want people to kind of, because you want to be famous, or maybe not even fame. Maybe fame's not the word. Just because you want people to know that you did the cool big event. Okay, and I'm gonna raise my hand up right here. If if we were in a class and I was saying how many of you have been that person, I'm raising my hand too.
I kind of raised it too. It doesn't help, and we did get in the news once again. I mean, it was just once again, for our second annual Pagan Pride Day. So that doesn't really help with the matter.
Sure, but I mean, and so the thing is, and this is good shadow work, because if you can acknowledge that yes, you wanted attention for this. Okay, awesome, because now you're honest with yourself and you've recognized it, and then you can work with it.
Yeah.
If you're going to deny it, if you're going to be like, oh no, I'm doing this completely entirely for service to community and that's it, I'm totally self-sacrificing. If you're not being honest that you want to get you want to be shiny, you want to be seen and noticed for doing this. Well, good. Then you can be honest about that, and you can know that that's a need that you need to have met. Everybody wants to be special. Everybody wants to be unique and seen for being unique and praised. We all want praise. There's nothing wrong with that. We have this American puritanical, like, oh, you shouldn't want praise. Like, no, I mean,
No.
praise, we all need praise. It's like, just like plants need sunlight, you know, we're human. But if you let it get out of control, that's where the egotism can kind of seize hold of your event planning.
Yeah, the way I see it is kind of like something out of It's a Wonderful Life. To feel like you have made a difference.
Right. And that's where it crosses back into service, you know. I think most of us who get this pagan event planning bug, most of us really are coming at it out of service. But if you have, you know, if you do want, you know, you do want praise and attention, just recognize that you want that, and recognize that maybe you're getting cranky because you're not getting that kind of praise that you want.
Yeah.
You know, and let's face it, and this is one of the, you know, we were just talking about the whole, you know, you got to get used to having the target on your back. You know, you start a pagan event because you want to serve, but yeah, you know, you want the nod, you want people to you know, say, hey, you did a good job,
Yeah.
and then you know, the complaints start coming in, and you're getting kind of the opposite of what you wanted.
Yeah, greatly.
And it can be a real challenge to balance that and hold that. And so that's why I say, like, the first thing you need to do as an organizer is really check in with, why are you doing it? And if you're working with a team, you might want to have a frank conversation, like not even planning the event, like just talking about yourselves as a team, and talk about, like, yeah, you know, what I really want to be, like I'm trying to think of something. Like, in the past, I used to do a lot of graphic design work for events I was volunteering for, and I just wanted people to tell me every once in a while, like, oh man, that flyer you designed for this is really cool. Like, that's all I wanted. You know, I just wanted a little nod. So, you know, what if we could actually have that conversation as a group and say, you know, I just want to be told that I did a good job, and we can have some agreements as a group around making sure that you know, without it being all like fake and flowery, and you know what I'm saying, like,
you know, rainbows, unicorns, that sort of thing.
Right, like, without it being all rainbows and unicorns, like, let's actually have a conversation about, what do you need out of this as a volunteer to feel good? Because that goes into the second thing that I think is really challenging with pagan events, is you're working with volunteers. And, you know, I'm one of those people that I get totally excited about other people. Like, if people are doing an event and they have a project or whatever, and they say, oh, Shauna, we could really use your help with blah, 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 blah. You know, graphic design is one of those things. And I might say, oh, your event sounds great, I'd love to help you. And then I've taken too much onto my plate and I drop the ball. and you know, and it happens with volunteers. It happens where, and from the other perspective, like that, you know, that's me as the volunteer, where somebody asked me, hey, I like your graphic design, would love you to do the flyer. And then I say, yeah, that'd be great. And then I run late on the deadline getting it to somebody, and then they're mad at me. You know, you don't want to do that. You want to only say yes to things that you're really going to be able to do. Conversely, as a leader, when I'm coming up with the really big, cool event idea, and I start asking people, like, hey, you know, you're really good at blah, 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 will you help me do that? And then they say, oh yeah, totally. And then like 3 weeks go by, and I'm like, hey, did you book those presenters? And they're like, you know,
yeah, because I know that was one thing that we learned as well, that communication is always a helpful tool too.
Right. You know, well, so part of it is also working with your team to address, like, hey, so we're all volunteers, and let's kind of have let's start out with like a thinking well of each other kind of a policy. Like, all of us are going to run late on a deadline at some point. And so instead of getting sucked into this fear loop of, oh man, I'm running late on this thing, and everybody's going to be mad at me, so I have to hide that I'm running late on this thing, you know, and it becomes this whole, like, I see it happen all the time. Instead, what if we were actually able to say, like, hey, I'm running late on this thing, I really need some help getting it done. And, you know, and then we can help each other on the team to do that. Now, if it keeps consistently happening, and if you've run an event, you know what I'm talking about, there's your awesome people who drop the ball on something because something came up, and it's kind of the exception to the rule. And then there's your person who actually never really gets anything done. You know, and again, it's about holding that paradox. That person did not wake up this morning intending to screw over your day.
No, it's just their nature.
it's just in their nature to commit to things and then to not be able to follow through. And they may be just really excited about the project and they really want to help, and then they totally get overwhelmed by life. And so that's a conversation you need to have as a team ahead of time as well. You need to talk about, like, okay, so what are the consequences here as a group for not getting things done? Like, at what point, like, how many times do we drop the ball before we suggest as a team that maybe you take this year off and maybe rejoin us again in the future when you have more time? Because that's a totally appropriate conversation to have.
Oh, yes.
What that usually requires, and what I recommend for an event planning team, is even if you're using overall a consensus process, consensus can be really challenging to use for an event planning process. And what I usually recommend is something more, what I would call a consensus-informed process, where you want your core team to all be really on the same page like they are in a consensus process, but you still need somebody to make the call at the end of the day. And, with event planning, there's time limits, there's things have to happen at a certain time. And so again, I mean, talking as a group around your power structure, and by power structure, I mean who is making decisions and how are those decisions being made. Now, going back to what we were talking about earlier, if you're coming into this and you want praise and recognition, you got to really be clear as a team. And this is where you got to be clear as a team, is like, okay, do I want to be, is it important for me to be in charge of this thing because I want praise and recognition, or because I have the most skills in this area?
Yeah.
And, and I got to say, that can be really hard. As like myself, when I first started volunteering for pagan stuff, I used to self-identify as like, oh, I'm the artist, I'm the designer. And then being on a team of people where there was another artist and another designer, all of a sudden my identity of myself and what I added to the team was challenged because, oh, what if they're a better designer than I am?
That's what I was about to say, because then there's the fear that comes in that, oh my gosh, this person might be 10 times better than myself, and I...
Right. And so, I mean, so what it really is trying to know yourself and trying to know, like, what do I want to be known for? And what do I want to be good at? And, like, as an event designer, like, maybe you aren't the best event planner yet. Like, maybe you have some great ideas, but you've never really run an event before. Well, gosh, if you have the opportunity to work with somebody who's better, who's got more skill, who's got more experience doing it, take the opportunity to work with them. Now, maybe your personalities clash, and I've had this happen where I have worked with other people who have a lot more event planning experience than I do, but our styles were just completely different.
Yeah.
So that, so just being aware about things like that. So a lot of it is really, I mean, it just goes down to that self-knowledge stuff, because that's the stuff that I see tear groups apart all the time. Now, getting down to brass tacks about an event, I teach facilitation classes on, like, I teach workshops on how to teach workshops, which is always kind of funny. Let's all look at our navels here. But, I have this list of things to never ever do. And, things you want to do are some of the basics. You want to get the site where it's going to be located. You want to get that established straight off, and you want to know where you're going to have your event, because where you're having your event totally can change the shape of the event, because maybe your event site can host 3 different workshop areas. Maybe it can only host 2, maybe it can host 5. You need to know, what's the sound containment like? Do you have doors that close? Do you have tents? Or is there going to be a soccer game happening next to your Pagan Pride event? And I go to a lot of Pagan Prides, and there's a lot of Pagan Prides where there's really noisy sporting events happening, like in the same park.
Yeah.
And as a teacher, I've got to say, it is really hard trying to, like some Pagan Prides are right next to a road and there's traffic. Other ones, there's a sporting event. Other ones, there's both traffic and a sporting event. And so, I mean, it's just taking into account that, your presenters may be having a really hard time talking over that background noise. And maybe that site isn't going to be the best one. So, I mean, those are things to think about, like trying to really look at a site for the amenities that it has, and is it really going to serve you? Some people are really spatially oriented in the sense of like they look at a space and they can see how everything's going to fit. Mm-hmm. But that most of the team is not going to be able to just look at a space and see how everything fits. And so you actually want to make a map. You actually want to measure stuff out and figure out how many vendor booths can fit here. Things like that, because some smaller events, it might not be as big of a deal, but I know for Chicago Pagan Pride, for instance, I know that they have the entire site measured out because only so many vendors can fit. So those are things where there's sometimes you're just going to be able to eyeball it, and sometimes you really do want to measure it out to make sure. Yeah.
Well, this has been some very wonderful information, and now this will help give some motivation for our Pagan Pride next year, even just as much.
Awesome.
But we'll take a short break here, and as the music plays, I want you all to listen to what we've talked about here. Maybe this will help you out here, and we will be right back here in just a moment. Don't go away.
Celebrate the rain falling down. Celebrate the green trees growing from the ground. Celebrate the new paradise we found. Celebrate the rain falling down. Celebrate the rain falling down. Celebrate the green trees growing from the ground. Celebrate the new paradise we found. Celebrate the rain falling down. Celebrate the rain falling down. Celebrate the green trees growing from the ground. Celebrate the new paradise we found. Celebrate the rain falling down. Celebrate the rain falling down. Celebrate the green trees growing from the ground. Celebrate the new paradise we found. Celebrate the rain falling down. 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 Celebrate the rain falling down.
And we are back, ladies and gentlemen. I hope you enjoyed the music. Well, now we're going to shift gears to something that I've found out about Shauna, that she's been into some major events with like the major protests that have gone on, recently in this country. One was interesting enough when I was following her Facebook protest that she was in the protest at the E3 summit in Chicago. And as that went down, and I want to ask you, as for one that's never been in any major protest, I've just seen the little just 5 or 6 people like in front of the post office, no war for one sort of thing. I've never ever been into any of those major ones. What is it like to be in the front lines?
Well, I have to say that's the first protest I've ever attended. So I picked a big one. It wasn't actually E3. It was the No NATO Summit.
Well, the NATO.
I'm sorry. It was the NATO Summit, and the protest was the No NATO March.
Oh,
and
I apologize, I was mistaken.
No, that's all right. That's all right. Well, what the basic gist of the protest, and it was a little bit of a confusing protest because there were so many different groups that wanted to march for their own issues, but they wanted to be part of the big protest. So like there was a lot of people there that like I don't know that I totally supported everything that everybody else was there for. I was like, I don't know, like that I that I support that, but but good on you that you're there.
Well, yeah, because when I see like NATO and E3 and all those protests, I just sit there and think, you know, okay, what are they protesting specifically about? You know, because I can faintly see the signs. You know, there's some protesting about like the fight in Iraq, something, you know, saying that we shouldn't be talking to this country or something like that, and it's like.
Well, here's how I can kind of articulate how protests like this get confusing. So for the most part, a lot of my activism is around ecological sustainability and social justice. Mm-hmm. And there's a place where those two come together. I just wrote about that a little bit. I was asked to be part of a blog called Pagan Activist. It's on WordPress, and I think if you Google Pagan Activist blog, you can find it. But there's like 4 or 5 of us, and we each write a post once a week. And so I wrote my first post in July, and I'll be writing another one this weekend. But the place where environmentalism connects to social justice and the peace movement or the anti-war movement is essentially this, that a lot of wars are fought over scarcity of resources. Mm-hmm. And so if you just think about that, if you think about scarcity of resources, and then you think about the environmental challenges that we're facing now. We're facing a future where oil is running out.
Yeah.
Coal is going to run out. Natural gas is going to run out. And nuclear is not a good and viable option, because if you look at what's going on in Japan, nuclear power is not a viable alternative, okay? Let's just put it out there.
Yeah, especially when they had just reported that some of the radioactivity created this mutated butterfly where the wings kind of looked like they had shrunk in the wash.
I mean, honestly, what's happening with the Fukushima plant could completely wipe out Japan, you know, mm-hmm. like utterly. Chernobyl, I mean, we're talking about the breadbasket of, you know, of the Ukraine. You know, Ukraine, that area, Ukraine and Georgia,
yeah,
that was the breadbasket, and that place is irradiated for what, 250,000 years?
Pretty much, because when the whole thing that was happening in Japan, they actually have tours, you can actually go through that.
Yeah.
But they still have a device that points out to where there's still some radiated areas there.
Well, I mean, and the disaster's not over. I mean, that they still haven't figured out what to do. So I mean, you know, this idea of resource scarcity. You know, we're looking at a future where, you know, right now, how much do you pay for your electricity? How much do you pay for your natural gas? How, you know, look, it's a little easier to see in the prices of gas. You know, you watch that price start to hike up towards $5 a gallon. You know, so then we're talking about resources, and looking at the wars we are fighting. A lot of the political decisions about which wars America gets involved in are because of resources.
Yeah.
You know, that we're pushing our noses into the Middle East because of oil. Okay. I mean, and that's not the only reason, but that's a factor, because there's other places where there are countries that have gone through the same kind of genocide that was going on in Iraq under Saddam Hussein, and we haven't done anything in those countries because they don't have any resources we need.
How did you get involved? I mean, did you just seek out like who was running like one of the protests that was going on there, or?
Oh gosh, you know, I'm part of the reclaiming tradition, and reclaiming tradition blends spirituality with activism and politics. Okay. A lot of reclaiming people are activists, and I have wanted to be. I've done a lot of personal activism, but I've wanted to maybe be part of some of the big protest marches for a while now, and really I didn't exactly know how to be part of that. But then when I saw on the different reclaiming lists they were talking about, but that was when the G8 summit, the G8 summit and the NATO summit were both supposed to happen in Chicago, and so I was like, great, I'll go to those. I'll connect with what's called the Pagan Cluster. There's a pagan, it's a pagan cluster of pagan activists, and often there'll be like a pagan cluster that goes to a lot of these big protests. Although there wasn't really a big one. Ironically enough, there really wasn't a there wasn't a pagan cluster presence, at least not that I know of, at the No NATO summit, the No NATO protest. But so I mean, for me being in this protest, like, am I anti-war? Well, pretty much for the most part. Now, on the other hand, yeah, there are times when force is necessary, and I'm not a political strategist, so I'm not going to get into the nuances of why and when I think that's appropriate. But I will say that, if there's a leader who is committing acts of genocide and, we're able to stop that, we're able to go help people, yeah, I think that's a moral and just thing to do. Now, who gets to decide that America is able to go do that? Well, that's kind of an imperialist question, and I'm not going to go into that right now.
Yeah, we're not going to.
But just on a moral level, I do think there are times when defense is necessary, and so I'm not for, like, we need to completely disband the army, because, yeah, I mean, we do need to have a defense system for people who might attack us as well. But at the same time, I'm also not for some of the indiscriminate, let's go get them because they have oil and we want it. Because we can. I'm not for that. And I'm also not for a lot of the, there's been deaths of innocent people, deaths of civilians. There's, the military, people are coming out of the military with massive, like, just PTSD. The suicide rates of our veterans is just incredible. So, so I am against war on an idealistic level. Mm-hmm. I understand that it's sometimes necessary, but for me, it goes back to the environmentalism, and it goes back to, if we are actually living in a sustainable relationship with the planet, if we are actually using resources at an appropriate rate, then we don't have all these big panic over resources.
Yeah.
And so that's where it goes into social justice as well, because, we talk about social justice and wanting people to have better jobs and wanting people to be able to earn a better living. But, if you look at the whole resource issue, who suffers the most when the natural gas starts to run out, when the oil starts to run out and the prices hike up, who's able to drive their cars? The rich. You know?
And that's, then that's what sprawled the whole "We Are the 99% protest.
Right. Exactly.
Even here in Fargo, I mean, it was just, it was small, very small short change compared to the bigger cities. Mm-hmm. But it's like, even if it happens in Fargo, North Dakota, that says something.
Yeah. I mean, it's, these issues are all connected. And so, it's not that I wouldn't have joined an anti-war protest, but for me, the environmental connection is really what was important. So I attended this protest, and I was hoping to find a contingent of other environmental activists to maybe march with. And I had a big inflatable planet, big 4-foot inflatable Earth that I've used for rituals. And so I carried this. But the protest was so big, there were literally something like 5,000 of us, that there were a couple of other pagans there, and I was not able to find them, even though, I have a 4-foot inflatable planet that I'll be holding over my head, and we still could.
It was still almost like a needle in a haystack.
Right. So there was just so many people, and I guess there was a climate change contingent that was there, but I never found them. So I mean, for me, attending this protest was not entirely just about the no NATO message. Mm-hmm. It was more that I believe things in our world and the way we approach things really need to change. And I wanted to stand up with other like-minded people to call attention to the fact that we need to change. We need to change our relationship to natural resources, how we're using them. We need to change our relationship to each other and how we treat each other. There's a lot of things that we need to change. And for me, that's what it was important to stand up.
When I was watching your posts on Facebook and you started to say that the police were starting to converge in, What was that? I mean, what did that feel like when because I take it that the police, the like the SWAT teams and all that were starting to push back on the protesters, was it?
Yeah, yeah. Well, my understanding is that the permit, the protester, the people organizing the protest, they had a permit, and the permit expires at a certain time.
Okay.
And at that time, and I don't know exactly what time the permit expired, but it had expired, and then the police started kind of pushing in against people. And I guess I could use the word aggressively. Like they were deliberately making the dogs bark as an intimidation technique. I mean, we're talking about hundreds of big guys, big guys in body armor, and they're pushing us back, and there's nowhere to go. Now, a lot of people were leaving, but
just not fast enough, though. That's probably the problem.
That was, I mean, they really were trying to get people out of there. They were using, it's called an LRAD, and that's the sound. It's a speaker. You can use it as a speaker to say, hey, you need to disperse, which is what they were doing. But more than that, it's also a sound weapon that can actually deafen you.
Oh my gosh!
So this thing is like about 30 yards away from me, and I had done some nonviolent activist training a couple weeks before this with Starhawk, and because she was in Chicago doing this training, and so like in this training we're talking about the sound weapon, and we're talking about tear gas, and we're talking about like what happens if sometimes the police will go postal and just start beating the crap out of people, and if you hit back, you can be arrested.
Yeah.
And so we learned how to curl up on the ground to protect your liver and your kidney on the right side, and how to protect the back of your neck. And so like I've got all this stuff going through my head as I'm standing there. But I mean, for me at this point, I was not, how can I put this? I was not there to be an instigator. I was not there to get up in the police's face.
Oh no.
And, now I will say, and I've said this before in other places, this protest, so I was trying to explain like how all the different contingents of people were there, and it was kind of a vague and nebulous protest. It was anti-war, but for me it was more about wanting to put the spark, get the spark lit for change.
Yeah.
But this wasn't for a specific issue that I felt like I needed to go get arrested to prove a point, kind of a thing.
Yeah.
Now, I've heard of places that have put forth legislation like gay people should be arrested. Obviously, none of this legislation has passed.
Yeah.
But there's legislators that have put forth legislation like that in local communities in different areas. And so let's just take a spin through what if. What if this legislation was on the table? What if, in fact, this legislation got passed? Well, you know what? I am going to be instigating some things with if there's police and they're trying to arrest and take my gay friends away to concentration camps, I don't know that I'd be sticking to nonviolence at that point. And I can say that pretty clearly. If somebody's going to try and take one of my friends away,
you would defend them to your very last breath.
Would defend them. And so, but I guess what I'm trying to get back to is that, like, at this protest, I wasn't there, in that headspace. This wasn't people are taking away my friends to concentration camps. This was just, this was something I believe in. So for me, and this is something that I've had a hard time to articulate, because my friends on the Pagan Musings podcast, Revcast was asking me, like, so why did you stay? Because I stayed until the very end. Like, I stayed until pretty much everybody had finally dispersed. And, I stayed through some of the protesters getting, there were some protesters who were getting in the police's face, and then they're whining about the police, hitting them with their batons. I'm like, well,
you get in their face, they gotta You don't counter.
At them, and you were kind of instigating that, and I saw it later. I saw it on TV. I'm like, oh yeah, I know who those guys were in the sense. No, well, not their identities, but I mean,
Yeah, you just saw them there.
There were some guys there that were, they were not nonviolent protesters, and if they tell you that they're nonviolent, they're not. They were there to instigate some violence happening. Not all protesters are nonviolent. A lot are, most are, I would say, but there's some that aren't. Mm-hmm. So I stayed until the end because so there's this LRAD thing. There's this sound cannon, and it's they're announcing that we must disperse or we will be arrested, and how do they phrase it? Something like less lethal force may be used.
Okay.
Which means rubber bullets, means tear gas, and they're listing all the things that they might use. So they're really trying to scare the crap out of people so that they leave. They're using basic intimidation techniques. Now, earlier in the show, we were talking about how we're kind of programmed by sitcoms and like how we should deal with communication situations. Well, we are actually really programmed from an early age to obey authority.
Yeah.
If you don't obey authority, you're bad and you'll get in trouble.
Yeah.
So part of why I was there was just to disobey. I wasn't there to light off any Molotov cocktails. You're
still trying to rebel against the man in a sense.
Well, yes. I mean, I was there to lose my fear of getting in trouble.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I'm standing there, like, there's these ranks and ranks and ranks of cops, and they're pressing in, and there's these big German shepherds, and they're growling, and they're barking, and, at one point, I was in the center of I was in the intersection, or right at Cermak, and, it was Wabash, I think that's where we were, and, there's people on all sides, there's nowhere to go. There's nowhere for me. I'm like, some people were kind of squeezing out of the area, but it was pretty much wall to wall packed. And I've got my bandana over my face, and it's soaked in lemon juice. You can soak a bandana in lemon juice or in vinegar, and it will somewhat protect you from tear gas, although not completely.
Well, that's good to know.
It is good to know. It is. But really what you want is a gas mask.
Yeah, that probably would be the better.
I mean, seriously, that's my understanding. It's like what you really actually want is a gas mask and goggles. But I didn't have that. I had a bandana soaked in lemon juice. So I've got this over my face. I've got earplugs in my ears to protect against the sound cannon in case they start doing that. And literally, I'm like one row of people behind this wall of cops, and they just, I'm tall, okay, I'm like almost 5'10", and these guys are they're enormous, and they're pushing us back, and they've got their batons, and they're shouting at us, and they're just pushing us back. I mean, I'll tell you, I have these earplugs in my ears, and all I can hear is my heart thudding and my breath.
Oh my god!
All I can hear is like.
It's almost like that scene from Saving Private Ryan where it's kind of like everything is just went silent except for your body. You just hear your body functions.
Yeah, I mean there are moments where like I mean obviously I was very adrenalized at that time. There's moments when everything seemed to speed up and happen really fast, and then there's other moments where just like a second seemed to last forever, and it's just like I'm watching all this, and because I've got these earplugs in, everything around me is kind of muted, and all I can really hear is like, and I'm breathing, and so I kind of notice I'm like I'm breathing really fast. Oh, I must be scared. Kind of
just realized like, oh, I'm fearing for my life here.
Well, I mean, I tend to get really. I'm one of those weird birds. I get really calm in a crisis, and it's not to say that my body isn't going through the physical adrenaline responses. It's just that I kind of snap into clarity, and I tend to be really calm in a crisis. I've sometimes thought being an EMT might be a good career option for me, just because I've been around people with like a major wound or something, and I'm like, okay, we're gonna put some pressure on this. You're gonna keep calm, and you're gonna call 911. So I mean, I'm usually the one who can keep really calm if pop something off. So I'm engaging and I'm thinking about this as it's all going on, and of course I'm thinking enough to send Facebook posts of what's happening, and we just keep on getting pushed back, and every once in a while, like, some protester with a big gash head wound is bleeding all over the place, and we pass them back and get them out. And I happen to have a backpack with a gallon of water with me, so I'm helping people hydrate, and I'm giving water to people, and it really, in the grand scheme of things, it really didn't erupt into any kind of terrible major violence. There's tons of protests that, especially with the Occupy stuff that happened late last year, that was way more violent. But
I remember watching one of those live. I think it was in Oakland as it was happening. Seeing how ugly that got. But it's good to know that at least yours kind of ended more of a peaceful manner. But still, it's just the thought of being so close to the police pushing on you, and that all it would just take is one little spark for it just to get ugly.
Right, and and I'll say this, from a strategic perspective, it sounds terrible, but it actually tends to work better for a movement if a lot of violence breaks out and it's instigated by the police.
Yeah.
Because then the movement will get a lot of sympathetic press. But I think there was a YouTube video that went around about these cops that were pepper spraying a bunch of nonviolent students, protesters. They're just like sitting on the ground, they're linking arms, and this cop is like spraying pepper spray, like pouring it onto their faces.
Yeah.
That kind of stuff gets a lot of sympathetic press for the movement. But what I will say for this protest is, I was there to kind of confront my fears around this sound cannon and around the the pepper spray and the tear gas. I was there to kind of confront my fears about that, because I can very much see that there's things going on in the world, of course, but in our country as well, that I'm not okay with. I'm not okay with some of the legislation that is out there on the table. I'm not okay with women's reproductive rights being threatened. I'm not okay with there's a lot I'm not okay with, and it would take way too long to go into all that. But there's a lot that is really it makes me scared. It makes me scared about what could happen. And so I wanted to go out to this protest, not only to stand up for the stuff that I believed in, but also to kind of look ahead to, okay, there may be a time when I'm prepared to sit down and get arrested in protest of things that are going on. There may be a time when I'm prepared to do that for a particular cause. There may be a time when I am prepared to chain myself to a building or to link arms with people in protest of something, that I consider to be especially heinous. And for me, a lot of that was breaking through that I must be a good girl conditioning. That
the stay within the lines syndrome, as some people put it.
We are indoctrinated at a very early age. Stay within the lines, obey authority, and you see somebody in a uniform and they're growling at you to back up, and your urge is to back up. Yeah, and I had to fight against every urge. Like I didn't get up in their faces and push back, but I made them push for every inch that I gave.
Made them make more of the effort than instead of trying to not make it look easy.
Right, and so for me, and in part because I was actually on the sidewalk, I wasn't blocking the street, which my understanding was, for the most part, that wasn't actually illegal. And other than the fact that it was illegal to not disperse when the police tell you to disperse. That was the illegal thing. But just being on the sidewalk was not illegal. And so from my perspective, it's like, okay, you're telling me to move off the sidewalk, but I'm not doing anything wrong here.
Do you think that your point got across?
No.
There's always that hope, of course, But
I think with a protest with so many messages, I mean, this protest, again, ostensibly it was just an anti-NATO, anti-war protest.
Yeah.
And I really don't think that there was a clear enough message for it to really get across. I do think that, I mean, it was like a parade. I mean, there were thousands and thousands and thousands of people watching us and videoing us. And so, I mean, certainly we got attention, but because of the violence that happened at the end and the fact that, I mean, yes, the police were being kind of jerks and pushing us really hard. And we really didn't have anywhere to go. It was really hard to actually get people moving, just as far as a people moving thing goes. But they were just being incredibly aggressive, and I guess I just didn't appreciate the spirit in which the police were coming in.
Yeah.
Anything. Like, they were coming in to intimidate, they were coming in to scare us, they were coming in to be bullies. And quite frankly, I could see in a lot of the cops' faces that they enjoyed it.
Yeah, which is common, if you love your job, that you're going to enjoy doing that, repeatedly over and over and over, especially with all that's been going on the past couple of years.
But I'll say this too, there were a lot of cops that were there to protect and to serve.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, we had both. We absolutely had both. I mean, and a lot of the Occupy 99% stuff is actually very much in support of the police and the police making a living wage.
Of course.
Having union rights. So, I mean, it's all, it all gets confused and kind of overlapping and conflicting. I mean, it's a lot of paradox. But, I mean, overall, for me, most of the activist work that I do, because there's a difference between being an activist and being a protester.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not going to be one of these hippie protester, travel around to different protests all the time and not shower. And there's people who pretty much there's the nomadic protest traveler people.
Yeah.
And they do. And I mean, I think that protests can occasionally be very effective ways of bringing attention to something. Like the Occupy movement as a whole.
Mm-hmm.
I would say the Occupy movement as a whole has brought a lot of attention to these 99% issues, or rather the 1% issues of, like, 1% of the people hold most of the wealth.
Yeah.
And that there's all these banksters that are not being held accountable for screwing up our economy.
Mm-hmm.
That and trying to bring attention to some of these issues. I think that the overall, the Occupy movement has done a great job of doing protests that actually bring attention to these issues. But any protest, it can be just really difficult to, like, you have to have enough people to bring attention to the issues, and you have to be seen. So if you're not getting news coverage, you're not really, so there's all these different factors. And the kind of activism that I do more of is, as far as environmental activism,
mm-hmm.
Well, I can tell you, I do a lot of environmental activism just by reducing my consumption. It sounds silly, but if we all used less electricity, if we all stopped buying crap, if we stopped buying styrofoam, if we stopped buying paper plates, if we just really conserve our resources, if we make sure to fill the air in our tires, if we drive less, if we make sure that our cars are tuned up so we're getting the best mileage possible, all these different things. Recycling is just like a basic thing.
Oh yeah.
And so many people don't do it. I mean, I cannot even tell you how many pagan events I've attended where they're just throwing things out. And I mean, and if you're sitting thinking, oh yeah, we kind of do that, it's just something that so many people don't even think about. I go to pagan events and people are eating off of styrofoam plates, and I'm like, do you know what does to the environment. Like styrofoam does not break down, folks.
Yeah, that's great understanding about it. Well, as much as I love to continue on this, this has been an interesting discussion and all that. I think it's time that we wrap this up here. Now, as per tradition, as these episodes, we'll go over some of the more recent events that's happening here in the Fargo-Moorhead area, as our Lake Agassiz pagan community does. For those of you who don't know, August 31st is a blue moon. It's the second full moon in a month. That's rarely ever happens. So if your weather is really good, I suggest you go outside there. We're holding a blue moon ritual up in M.B. Johnson Park in Moorhead. We're going to have like a nice drumming circle. I'm bringing my telescope out there. It's going to be so wonderful to watch.
That's awesome.
Oh, yeah, very much so. Then we're celebrating Mabon on September 22nd, which is here in the Coven set here in Castleton, North Dakota. So we'll be selling our thanks and all that for the harvest, which, thanks to our mild winter, our harvest is right into with Mabon for once. Usually in North Dakota, our harvest is like a month after Mabon, but this time it's right on schedule practically. And then we have also on October 22nd in Lake Park, Minnesota, we also have a salmon masquerade and rite. That's going to be very interesting. Everyone's going to be dressed up in their costumes. I heard there's going to also be a nice murder mystery and all that. If you have any further information, you can go to meetup.com for the Lake Agassiz pagan community for all those recent events. But yeah, that will wrap it up. And
awesome. Well, and I'd just like to say that I know I've talked about a couple of things that people might be going like, oh, what do you mean by that? And so, I mean, if you want to talk about energetic protection work and some of my philosophies around it, if you want to talk about ritual facilitation, public speaking training, pagan leadership stuff, group dynamics, any of this stuff, environmental activism, I am more than happy to talk to folks about it. You can find me on Facebook. My Facebook is Shauna Aura Knight, and you can find me on I have accessible via email, shaunaora@gmail.com. And, Facebook's probably the easiest place, but go ahead and shoot me a message. I may not get right back to you, but I certainly do love talking about bringing ourselves into being more professional as pagan.
Yeah, we'll provide this information in the description as well, so you'll have that all available there. So, Shauna, it has been a pleasure and a great honor. I thank you so much for being on the show and listening to it. Wonderful. You had a lot of information. I'm glad we were able to talk about it so much.
Absolutely. Well, yeah, and certainly once I get going on revamping my podcast, I would love to have you on for that.
Oh, that would be so much an honor here. So for the Great North Pagan Podcast, this is Thomas LionLord Punton sign off. Merry meet and blessed be to all.
Blessed be.